Hey everyone, it's Ina from inaseawatercolor.com. In today's video, we're going to paint a urban scene featuring some of the landmarks in San Francisco, including the ferry building on the left-hand side and the Market Street high-rises on the other. I enjoy painting urban scenes since I always have an appreciation for architectures. And I love the fact that cities typically have a mashup of different architecture styles, the old and the new, and things have to build on each other, right? Because Rome is not built in one day. And I love the different contours, architecture details, suggesting they're from different eras. And I also enjoy painting people and cars in the streets, which just really give a lively vibe, right, to the painting. Now, these things can be challenging to paint because it requires the accuracy of drawing as well as confidence when applying, your especially darker color. But fear not, in today's video, I'm going to take you through the process of how I approach it, from drawing accurate perspectives to painting a lot of objects in one go without spelling out all of these details. Okay, enough said for now, and let's just get started. Let's look at the painting reference photo. I took this photo when I was, of course, taking a stroll on the Embarcadero area. And I was lucky that when I visited San Francisco not too long ago, it was like the first sunny, warm weekend where everybody was out and it was super lovely in front of the water. Cool. So in terms of composition, naturally, when you take a photo pointing upwards, you're going to get these converging perspective lines. But I think for the painting process, it's just easier and it will make the scene look more calm if we simply just use vertical lines. So that for sure will be the first thing I modify. Next, let's look at the positioning of the objects. So I like these figures kind of walk in the shadow towards that direction. But I think there are too many repetitions somehow between these guys, and there are not enough like lit figures in the sun. So I think by placing some figures in the shade and some in the sun next to each other, it will create a much nicer dynamics. So probably eliminate this figure, but move them somewhere into the sun so that you have that lovely contrast going. In terms of the focal point, I definitely think that these architecture details on the ferry buildings are key to capture. But I do think there could be potentially another focal point somewhere around here with the top of the cars and people in the streets, and maybe include, some of these cars as well, making them bigger, adding some more cars in this area so that they can create a really lovely connected shape of light and dark in the center of the painting. These buildings are very dominant, of course, in the composition of the photo. I am thinking I possibly only need to keep one building because these buildings are so identical that I worry that they will look very repetitive if I painted both verbatim. So what I would do is likely I will crop the composition here so that this building doesn't have to be shown all the way, where I will need to upplay, maybe enlarge some of these areas, because those buildings together are also a really important kind of landmark of the Embarcadero urban scene. This building, I want to make sure the contour, I don't know if you can see it. This is actually the Hillsborough coffee building. This is an old one, and it really is the signature shape of the Bay Bridge area, where you can see this ramp of Bay Bridge is kind of coming up in the distance. I want to make sure I capture both of these shapes clearly, which means I will need to enlarge these objects so that they play a more active role in the composition. For the drawing process for this one, as usual, I mark the key positions of the objects to make sure they don't exceed certain dimensions, making sure to enlarge the background buildings as I intended. In the Bay Bridge, as well as the Hills Coffee Bro building, contours are also very clear. I think what will become our vantage point is right underneath this Bay Bridge. So we will mark that as a vanishing point, and don't be afraid to use a ruler. We're doing an urban scene, right? You don't have to paint straight, but using the ruler can really help getting the perspective right and just not sweating over it. It can save you tons of time, especially a lightweight ruler like this one. It's easy to maneuver, easy to pick up, and I prefer rulers like that whenever I draw perspectives, so it gets done easily. This is also the benefit for marking the key dimensions of the objects, so that you can simply connect the 2 points between, say, the corner of a building to the vantage point to draw a line. For the figure, I will keep one of the figures in the shade area, but we'll add in a number of different figures, kind of walking in groups or individually in the background that will be in the sun. Keep the street lamps because I do think that they add a little bit of vertical rhythm to the overall horizon line, but I got rid of the parking sign, which was just a square in the middle of the painting, and that's a distraction to the composition. Now drawing some of the cars on the right hand side. This appears to be a bus and some smaller cars, and for the rest I just kind of fudged it because all we need to do is to suggest there are some objects there. So I mainly wanted to remind myself to leave some white area on the top of the objects so that you look like there are more cars and structures in the background. Photo, it looks quite empty, so I went in and added some more cars of different distance and position in the street. This front car could be a bit tricky to paint because it's on its own and it's also in the shade, so I need to remember to make sure that it doesn't stand out too much on its own as an object, but rather it blended into the shadow that goes across the front of the painting. This is today's color palette. Apart from my usual suspects like burnt umber, French ultramarine, burnt sienna, I have also added lavender, peach, a bit of indigo, and as well as cerulean blue and a sky blue. So these additional blues is used for painting the sky primarily, and maybe add a little bit into the shadow. This is a sunny scene at noon, for which the sky color and the shadow color are actually cooler, which is not as intuitive because you would think sunny days it's warmer and therefore color is warmer. But no, that's why I use some of the cooler blues here. I just prefer that over using ultramarine blue, which is very warm blue, and then having to mix maybe something like a turquoise or a phthalo blue in order to cool it down. I like the cerulean blue as well as the pale sky blue. Just gives a bit more vibrancy than if you were to mix ultramarine blue with phthalo. Now let's get started with the painting. When I was wetting the paper, I did not specifically leave out the tower as well as the building contours in the background because these shapes are quite complicated. So if I were to avoid every single object when I paint that very bold sky area, the chances are I'm going to leave out by accident some of the white space around the buildings, which then later becomes a halo effect, as it's called, that will really distract the viewer. So what I would do instead is to paint over these objects and then coming later use a damp towel or a brush to lift some of the paints that bled into the building area. In the reference photo, the sky is so clear, but I decided to add a little bit of like streaks of clouds in it because these buildings are already really square and rigid looking. If I don't add a bit of softness in the sky, the whole painting will look quite dull. So I want to add a bit of movement in the sky by lifting some of the areas and creating these streaks in the sky. Now you see me using a paper towel and just some clear water to lift up the paint that went beyond the shape of the building. When I step back and look at the sky, I know unfortunately the sky is not going to be dark enough when it dries. The funny thing about sky and the color blue, I shall say, is that it always dries so much lighter than you would have guessed. Despite the risk of bleeding into these objects even further, I still went ahead and added another coat to the sky. And actually it will let it dry upside down because that way the intense blue does not travel all the way into the horizon area, which I want to be much lighter than the top of the sky. The sky is almost dried. While I wait, I went ahead and mixed up some pools of colors just so that they're ready to go. The colors that I'm now using applies to kind of the lit surface or the lightest area of the painting, anywhere that I don't want white to show through. However, when painting an urban scene like that, I still want to leave some of the paper to show through because unlike a cityscape painting where water is so soft and fluid, cityscapes typically have different architecture details, textured surface and such, that if you just go ahead and leave some white paper shown through, it's going to help creating that texture. Now that these lit surfaces are colored in, I can go ahead and mix and apply the midtone, which are the shadow areas that really is spamming across the entire painting. Starting with the clock tower of the ferry building, but I will gradually add in some more sky blue gouache as well as some yellow ochre mixture as I go down. The yellow ochre there is to depict the reflective light. You will see that even in a photo, the shadow of the structures at the bottom is much lighter and warmer than the clock tower shades itself. That is because the light from the ground are getting reflected onto these buildings here, for which I will want to capture and equally apply a bit of more of a yellow ochre hue to it. However, to prevent the paint from getting muddled real quick, which is typically the case when you try to mix yellow and blue, I did use 2 paintbrush so that they would not mingle as much and will last for a while, so that I can complete painting the entire shape without having to go in, cleaning the brush, and remixing colors. I was debating a little bit whether to paint that roll of bush in front of the building right now or wait till later, and decided that I might as well strike it while the iron is hot, right? So that these vibrant green color can blend a little bit into these high contrast shapes of the archways, so that they don't look as if they're disjointed. I think the left-hand side is looking good. Now we can move on to the right-hand side. I'm not going to paint all of the figure yet until I come back later and address them. So just continue on with this mid-tone value on the right-hand side of the painting, pre-mixing some paint as that area is large and these shapes are all connected. So I need to do that in one go. This main building has these grid shape on it. I'm not sure I can even paint that individually. So what I decided to do is just paint as one block of color, and maybe I will use an accent color later on to draw out the shapes of the window. I like that these glass buildings in urban landscapes are always reflecting its surroundings. So when I paint this facade, even though it's quite dark, it still has variations within it. For example, the upper left corner of this facade is brighter, which probably reflects the sky, and the rest of the shape actually reflects the building next to it. Now we just continue on with this large mid-tone shape where I painted the shaded parts of the trees, and then I switched over to a cool gray color and making sure I paint the negative space of the cars. Instead of moving further down to paint the large shape of the shadow, let's continue and finish the skyline. Because that area is more connected, we need to work quickly to paint them while the paint is still wet. Even though ideally I would like to paint all these shapes in one connected shape, the fact is that the paint will dry up before I ever get there. If you have to stop working on an area and move on to the next one, stop at a point where it's least noticeable. For example, I stopped right on top of these cars on the right because I know that I will leave a bit of white on top of these cars so that it wouldn't look as disconnected if I just stop there, go on and finish the rest of the painting, and then come back to reconnect the shape further down the paper. Time to paint the shape of this large shaded area, for which I will need to paint in a figure as well as this front car. Now just moving down to further connect these shapes that we have painted earlier on, all in one go. The challenge with this front car is that I will need to make it obvious that this is a car without taking over too much attention away. So I did go ahead and apply a coat of darker gray on it while the paper is wet, so that the shape will be soft and it wouldn't look as out of place once it dries up. Sorry about my head in a way. Sometimes when you paint little details like that, you couldn't help but hunched over the paper like a wedge. Next, let's address the sunlit figures. I like to start by painting the skin tone, because that gives me immediately an idea of the posture of these figures and the shape of their clothing that will be. One effective technique of painting figures, after you apply some colors to their clothing or skin area, you use a wet brush just to smear the color together a little bit, because figures are rounded shapes, right? So you don't want everybody to look like a robot. Now we're approaching the last step of the painting, where I'm just doing some fine tuning to the shapes and now adding a bit more darker tones to make certain areas pop more. Okay, I think we are done. All right, let's take a look at the finished painting. I think overall I'm happy with this painting. I think it captured the vibe of the sunny day in San Francisco with, people walking, traffic coming and going, just a lovely urban scape. I think things that went well include this particular area where you can see there are some objects in the background, but just only suggesting this ferry building area where the sun hits one face and leaving the other one in shade. I'm glad that I exaggerated kind of the lit facade, so the viewer can kind of perceive these two light and dark areas more clearly, as versus in a photo reference, the lit facade is just really thin. I think this method of painting these like dark glass buildings also worked, where I just painted a dark solid background and then use some light gouache to outline the shape of the buildings. Yeah, in this case, I think it created a nice contrast with other buildings next to this one, where I almost created a bit of a focal point as well using gouache, because thicker paint naturally draws more attention to the area. If I were to be picky about it, I think two things I would like to improve further. One is that these details on the ferry building clock tower, the contrast between the mid-tone and the dark tone is just not high enough, where the architectural details there are a bit lost. If I were to do it again, I would apply a much lighter mid-tone wash, so to preserve enough of a contrast with the dark brushwork. Another small error I made here is that I did not erase this mistake of the lamp in the background. So if you forget to do that and you apply paint on top, you can't erase that pencil mark anymore. So in most cases, it wouldn't matter because the coat of paint is usually darker and thicker than the pencil. But in this case, this pencil area is like literally in the lightest portion of the painting, so it is quite obvious there. But overall, happy with the work. I think I have learned some new tricks and technique that I can definitely carry on and utilize in the future. So yeah, quite happy about the outcome. It appears we have reached the end of today's video. I really appreciate you guys sticking around and watching the whole process. If you enjoyed the video, please do click like and subscribe to my channel, which will help me grow in helping my content be more discoverable to others. Before I leave, I just want to mention that my paintings are for sale. You can go visit my website that I have linked below. It's inacwatercolor.com if you're interested. And I have also included my social links as well as my leatherworking store. I'm hoping to do some leatherworking videos as well, because there are some fun projects I have in mind for painters and artists. All right, hope you'll stick around and I will see you next time. Bye.